I'm Jenny Brown. Welcome to this week's edition of MFB News. I hope you're really well. So look, I'm actually delighted to be sitting here in the boardroom where it's not Arctic conditions. Our air conditioning, dare I say, is probably controlled by man. And so we have the typical office dynamics when the weather gets really warm about what temperature we want the air conditioning to be set at. So all the women are sat there in jumpers, freezing, and all the guys there going, "God, it's really warm in here, isn't it?" So I've come into the boardroom and it's actually really nice because there's no air conditioning on, so it's quite temperate actually. I hope you're doing really well in this heat. I hope everything is good for you. In terms of what we've got for you this week, we're going to do our usual look at what's been happening with interest rates, do a summary in terms of where mortgage pricing sits. I haven't done this for a couple of weeks because things have just been so volatile, but actually things have kind of, I want to say settled down, that's not entirely true, but actually it feels like the right time to kind of update you as to where things are sitting. We're going to have a look at landlord confidence across the market based on some data that's been released from a large landlord survey. We're going to be also looking at rental calculations and just updating you about where those are sitting now. And then finally, update on my getting back of my buy-to-let property from my non-paying tenants. Okay, interest rates. So sadly, another week of more of the same actually. So swap rates have been sort of staying fairly static and very gradually inching up. And we've seen another huge raft of lenders repricing upwards. This is actually now making it into the news. I know HSBC and NatWest made withdrawals this week, and that made it into, I think, the BBC News actually. That's how important this stuff is now, guys. So I just wanted to really run through with you what's been happening with swap rates and then do a roundup. I'm not going to go through every single lender change again because I'm sure it gets quite boring me just telling the lenders that pull pricing. So let's make this a little bit more poignant. So in terms of swap rates, first of all, so 2-year swap rates as of noon on Tuesday, 5.302. For context, 1 week ago, 2-year swaps were at 5.118 and 1 month ago at 4.397. 5-year swaps tipped over 4.7 now, so currently 4.702. 1 week ago, 4.526, and 1 month ago, we're looking at 3.898. So essentially, swap rates are almost 1% higher now than they were this time a month ago. Now, in terms of what's actually going on and why this nervousness is continuing, I mean, there's lots of things that go into pricing in the money markets. And I think when I was trying to kind of research this and understand what on earth's going on, I don't have someone in the city I can just phone up and ask, by the way. I was just doing some research and there were some good news stories in there that I think actually should positively impact market confidence, and there's some bad news stories in there as well. So I thought I'd just kind of share these with you just to give you a flavour about the kind of stuff that go into swap rate pricing and confidence in the market and what's going to happen. So the good news is that, first of all, as of this morning, oil prices were down to $71.80 a barrel. Now this increased after the Saudis announced they were going to reduce the production of oils by 1.16 million barrels a day. This happened earlier in the month. It seems that actually prices did float up a little bit and they've come back down again. The other bit of good news is that the Fed is meeting today, so this is Tuesday, and there is an expectation they're going to be putting a pause on their interest rate hike, so hopefully that will kind of go in our favour. Adversely, what we had released today was news about wage inflation. So wages are up 7% in the private sector, that's excluding bonuses, and in the public sector, 5.6% if people have more money to spend. And I appreciate that compared to inflation, these are net pay cuts. But the reality is while people are continuing to get pay rises, they have more capacity to be able to absorb some of those increased costs that people keep on spending. And this is then further kind of underpinned by the data that's been released by the ONS saying that credit and debit card spending has increased with overall retail footfall at its highest level since 2023. So people are still out buying stuff. And that's largely probably facilitated, no doubt, by these wage increases. So this will go against us when it comes to inflation. So these are just some of the bits of data that people are looking at, trying to kind of predict what's going to happen with interest rates, and this will be going into swap rates. I'm not saying it's the finite list, there's going to be lots and lots of different things that go in there, but this is the kind of stuff that's going on the mix. So some good and hopefully in our favour, some bad. As I said last week, we're really not expecting to see much change in terms of swap rates until next week. So next week we have the ONS data on inflation coming out. We really need core inflation to be going back down again. And then the Bank of England will be meeting on Wednesday and making their announcement of base rate on Thursday. We are expecting a 25% basis point increase, but assuming that happens and assuming that core inflation has come down, which would be an amazing situation to find ourselves in, then it might just give the capital markets more confidence and hopefully start to stop this increase in swap rates. But you know, at the moment it's just so hard to tell. It feels like everything is just so hard to call, but that's kind of what we're hoping for. Now, in terms of how this is playing out into mortgage pricing, so like I say, there has been an inordinate amount of news about this, but how does it work in real terms? So if you're a personal borrower looking to lend against a straightforward property, so no HMOs, no multi-units, and you have a portfolio of realistically less than 10 buy-to-let properties, then your 2-year pricing, 2-year fixed rates are from 4.49% with a £4,000 fee, and 5-year fixed rates from 4.28% with an arrangement fee of £1,395. Now, if you're a limited company, an HMO or a multi-unit, or you have more than 10 buy-to-let properties, you move into what we sort of very affectionately refer to here as the specialist end of the market. And so with that, there comes a slightly more complicated pricing matrix. So limited company rates, so 2-year fixed rates. So you can get a 2-year fixed rate from 4.5%, but you will pay a 5% fee. Net interest rate, if you just simply average this 5% fee across 2 years, so 2.5% per year, and add it to the 4.5%, the actual interest rate you're paying here is 7%. There's also rates from 5.1% with a 3.5% fee. Your average interest rate, therefore, is 6.85. And there's also rates from 5.59 with a 2.5% fee, which gives you a blended interest rate of 6.84. So that's kind of where your 2-year money is. On 5-year fixed rates, it's a similar story. So 4.79%, 5-year fixed with a 7% fee. That would make your actual kind of average rate blended between the interest rate and the arrangement fee at 6.19. You can get 5.3% fixed for 5 years with a 3% fee. That makes your actual interest cost 5.9. And from 5.5% with a 2% fee, which also makes your cost 5.9. Now, in terms of these interest rates, which have the lower interest rate and the higher arrangement fee, as you can see, just on the few examples that I've given you just there, these don't tend to work out to be quite as competitive, but there are reasons why some people will take them. It largely boils down to 2 things: rental calculations and a desire to keep your cash flow as kind of effective and low as possible. And I'll come on to rental calculations in a minute. But that's where we are in terms of pricing. Like I say, it's been another kind of wave of lenders repricing. We've had a bunch of emails come through today. It's just sort of 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So we've had this morning more emails coming in saying the lenders are repricing again. So unfortunately, I think this is kind of where we are for the time being. But hopefully, come next week, we might have some more positive news. Okay, now I just want to touch on rental calculations because these are so important for people and causing more of a problem than ever before. The reason for this is because people are paying more money in interest. This eats into the rental income more significantly, which leaves less of a surplus. So in very short terms, because of the increase in interest costs, you can now borrow less per pound of rental income than you could a year ago or 2 years ago. So things have become more restrictive in terms of how much you can borrow based on the rent. So what's been quite interesting for us to witness is that these calculations that the lenders are using are, to some extent, the lenders have some flexibility on the calculations they use, but there are some fundamental principles they have to stick to, which are set out by the regulator. And believe me when I say no lender wants to cross the regulator. So what lenders have been doing in the wake of this higher interest cost and the impact this has had on rental calculations is they've been going back and revisiting their lending criteria to try and understand what they can do to tweak things to make numbers work more comfortably for landlords. So one of the things that we have seen is these deals where the arrangement fees are very high, but it keeps the interest rate down, and therefore that means that actually you can enjoy a more flexible rental calculation than a mortgage product where the interest rate is very high, but the arrangement fees are very low. Now, Landbay in the last week announced that they've introduced what they're calling a like-for-like product set on 2-year fixed rates. So what they're going to do is, if you're remortgaging on a like-for-like basis, so not raising any capital, just literally taking the same debt that you currently have to them as a new lender, they're going to give you a more favourable rental calculation, which is the pay rates, the fixed rate that you're going to be paying, plus 1%. So the rental calculation would be 125% if you're a limited company, or 145% if you're borrowing individually, based on a rental calculation of 5.89%. So their rates start from 4.89, they had a 1% loading, so 5.89%. Now, this is not news in terms of the broader market. There's lots of lenders who already offer more favourable rental calculations if it's a like-for-like transaction. This is something which the regulator is kind of on board with. But it just got me thinking that actually we haven't really discussed where we are with these lately. And like I say, even if you can wrap your head around the interest rates and the arrangement fees, which are kind of what they are at the moment, being able to then get the amount of money that you actually want or need can also be a challenge. So if you are an individual and you are looking to borrow as much as possible, then without approaching lenders who are using top slicing or income-backed calculations, i.e. bringing your own income into the mix, if you're just looking at lenders who are just working on the rental calculation solely to figure out how much, what level of borrowing would be affordable, then you're looking at a maximum of 182 times the monthly rent. So if your rental income was £1,000 a month, then the maximum loan would be £182,000, even if in reality, because of the loan to values at say 75%, you could be getting say 250, 300. It doesn't matter. 182 times monthly rent is the absolute maximum. Now this is for a specialist lender. So specialist lenders are quite good at pushing the boundaries a little bit. If you're looking for a high street lender who's offering the lower rates at the moment, and traditionally always will do just because of the way their funding models work, then these guys is 138 times monthly rent. So £1,000 a month worth of rent would get you a mortgage of £138,000. Now, if you are, and there are lots of variations on this, I should hasten to add, your tax code goes into it, the property type, all sorts, but these are kind of the more generous end of the market. Now, if you're a limited company, then what you will find is you can borrow, broadly speaking, 185 times the monthly rent. Now, when we're able to work at 180 times rent, that does actually cover quite a large chunk of people. There were, I can think back to when we were able to get 320 times the monthly rent. So it shows you how much things have kind of been reined in by. But actually a large chunk of people will be able to make the numbers work on the 180 times monthly rent figure, particularly with rents increasing. What you will find is that if you're looking to get a 75% loan to value deal away with someone like the Mortgage Works, BM Solutions, Skipton, these kinds of lenders who traditionally would offer the lower pricing, what you're going to find then is you're going to be capped more significantly in terms of the rental calculation. Now, the Mortgage Works have released the final of their series of reports based on research they've done by reaching out and speaking to thousands of landlords. And this is covering off Q1 2023. So bearing in mind we're in June, you could argue that it's slightly out of date, but it's still really, really interesting. And it's interesting because these are the thoughts and words of our landlord colleagues. So this one's called their Regional Snapshot, and what they've done is actually taken the information, the research they've done, and grouped it by region of where the landlords live. And there's some really interesting reading in here actually. So I think the first kind of comments they make more broadly about the UK overall. So in comparison to Q4 2022, Q1 23 reports slightly more optimism amongst landlords. So confidence has increased across 3 out of the 5 key metrics this quarter versus Q4. Now, what they also say is, despite this, the portion of landlords making a profit this quarter continues to decrease by -3% to 78%. Both rental arrears and void periods have also increased in Q1, so up by 4% and 3% respectively. Current divestments, people selling, has also increased at +4%, whilst acquisition has decreased by -3%. So more people are selling property than there are buying them. And actually, incidentally, what they're saying here is that of the people surveyed, 4% bought a property in the last 3 months and 16% sold one. Now, if we go into this on a more regional basis, and there is a whole one-page report for each region, I've kind of taken the key takeaways that I found most interesting. So in terms of landlords who are feeling very, very good or just good about rental yields, the region where we're seeing the strongest kind of level of optimism is the east of England, with 56% of respondents feeling good or very good about rental yields. Now, these guys, interestingly, despite feeling the most positive about rental yields, also have the third lowest average yield across the UK at just 5.1%. So we don't know what the east of England people are doing, but obviously they're feeling quite positive nonetheless, which is great to see. In terms of capital gains, so the North East and the Yorkshire and Humber are feeling most optimistic about the prospect of capital gains, with 27% of respondents feeling good or very good about it. Now, the North East, interestingly, are also one of the regions that has reported the highest incidence of rent arrears in the UK, at 55% of respondents experiencing some type of rent arrears, but these guys are still feeling positive about the prospect of capital gains. Yorkshire and Humber, they're feeling less confident than they did in Q4, but actually they still have increased their optimism across all of the metrics. It's just they've sort of not necessarily increased as much as they did in previous surveys. This area, interestingly, have also got the highest level of divestment, with 32% of landlords divesting, which is double the UK average. That's quite unusual, isn't it? Now, in terms of optimism about the UK private rental sector more broadly, so London is feeling the strongest about this, the most positive, with 19% of respondents feeling good or very, very good. Now, London's an interesting one because London has seen a decrease in all of the metrics bar confidence in the UK financial markets, which actually is up 10%, which is far stronger than any other region. London has also experienced the greatest worsening in average rental yield, and it's now reporting in at 4% for this area. So it just goes to show you that different regions seem to bring with them different kind of beliefs and confidence in different parts of the market, but likewise some of these almost fly in the face of actually what's going on there, but I just think it makes really interesting reading, and despite there being some kind of greater negatives, as it were, so people, for example, divesting, actually, you know, the general kind of overtone of the report is actually very positive. But like I say, this is going back to Q1, so let's see what this Q2 reports once we get those reports through. Okay, now having dragged you along with me on my crusade to get back my buy-to-let property from my non-paying tenant, I thought it only fair that I share with you that yesterday, on Monday, the tenants finally left the property. So they haven't paid rent since August, so obviously I was quite glad to see the back of them. So what was quite interesting is that the appointment for the bailiff was due to be there at 10:30. The agent and the locksmith were instructed to be there 15 minutes before, which they duly were. The bailiff never showed up. I mean, can you imagine if the tenants were still in the property and we'd have to have gone back to court, and goodness knows, probably started all over again. So I have emailed my sister saying, can you ask for a refund, please? Because obviously it's like £400 or something, which I didn't really need to spend. So yes, that was quite interesting. But the great news is the tenants are vacated. Now, in terms of the condition of the property, it's filthy, it's disgusting, but it's not trashed. So I'm really, really grateful for that. So the plan of attack for me now is to, first of all, the agent has to go through and do the inventory. That's a kind of legal requirement. The tenants are no doubt going to expect their deposit back, which is ironic, but anyway, we've got to go through that kind of process as well. But in terms of getting my property up and running again, so I need to put new carpets in, have it repainted, and also just have it like properly deep cleaned, and then we can get re-advertising it. Where I am in Sevenoaks with this particular property, I feel like it should let relatively quickly. So fingers crossed, in my mind, August, so it'll be a year almost to the day, I should be able to be getting some tenants lined up and moving in. Now, the other thing that I need to do, apart from getting my property re-let, is try and recoup some of the £20,000 that I'm down because of this whole episode. So this includes rental arrears, court fees, solicitors' fees, and all sorts. I don't know how much I can actually try and get back, but I'm going to try and get back at least some of it. Now, I have emailed my solicitor asking what the process is for this. He hasn't yet come back to me, but I have been doing my own bit of research. And it looks like what I need to do, and I think I can do this online directly, is I can obtain what's called a money order. And there's a government sort of backed website called Money Claim Online. And apparently this kind of process of obtaining a money order is essentially what we would have traditionally called taking someone to the small claims court. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill in a form online, and I'm going to submit my claim, which will then mean that the defendants, the tenant and the guarantor, are going to get notification that I'm pursuing them via a court process and I'm asking them for, X amount of money. Now, at this point, apparently, because my claim is over £10,000, I need to pay fees of 5% of my claim. I can also claim interest actually of 8% of what's owed to me, which is quite interesting, but 5%. So I'm looking at having to shell out £4,000 just to kind of do this, and if I'm not successful, then I've lost that £4,000. So I suppose there's a bit of a deterrent there, isn't there? So I'm just kind of having a chew over that one and kind of letting the dust settle with the tenants move out before I really go along this route. Now, what happens is the tenant and the guarantor get a letter saying, Jeni is pursuing you for £20,000. If they then settle, then happy days. If they don't then settle, then what happens is I can request that the court gets involved and requests a judgment, and this can then involve a hearing with another fee, and we go from there. Now, I don't expect to get any money out of the tenants. They were in breathing space, they clearly don't have any money, but I am expecting the guarantor to be able to pay something. So the best case scenario is that we send this initial letter out and they say, oh yeah, you're absolutely right, here's £20,000. I really don't think it's going to happen, by the way. So the next thing will be, possibility is that they come back and say, I'm not going to give you £20,000, but I'll give you a percentage of that. And I would be willing, of course, to enter into a conversation about it just to get the whole thing kind of done. But if they simply refuse to discuss any sort of payment at all or come back with a level that's far too low, then we're going to go down the court process. Now, if the judge finds in my favour and says, yeah, you guys really do have to give Jeni some money, and they're unable to pay straight away, there's a couple of things that I believe can happen. So first of all, they can do what's called an attachment to earnings, which means that essentially when they get paid, an amount of that salary has to come to me. The second option is that I can essentially put a charge on their house, which means that ultimately if it ever gets sold, then at that point I have to get my money paid to me. So that could be, 10, 20, God knows how many years in the future, but I would get that money. And my understanding is that then the interest is still accruing during that period of time. An interest rate of 8%, which I think is quite generous. I'd like to find a bank account. Here's what you should go into. If you can get an interest rate on your savings of like 3.5%, 8% if you've got a non-paying tenant who owes you money. It's almost better than putting it with the NatWest, isn't it? Anyway, so that's where we are. So really amazing news. Thank you all for sticking with me on this one. I will keep you updated in terms of the chasing of the guarantor down for payment. I suspect, as with all these things, it's just going to go really quiet for a matter of weeks, but as soon as I have more news, I will share it with you. And that's me for this week. Thank you, as always, for joining me. Like I say, every week I regret that I'm not giving you better news. It just is what it is at the moment, and let's keep our fingers crossed for next week. There is a chance I won't actually be able to do a video next week. I've got some medical stuff going on, so if I'm not here to tell you what's happening in terms of swap rates on the back of the ONS data and the Bank of England announcement, or the likely Bank of England's announcement, we'll follow up the following week. But as always, if you want to have a hot off the press information, you can just give us a call, 0345 345 6788. Go on our website, we've got an online chat, there's lots of email addresses so you can email into people directly, all that kind of stuff. Enjoy the heat wave, long may it continue. I enjoyed it at about 6 o'clock in the evening when I finally get out of the office away from the air conditioning. I hope you are able to enjoy it. Wear your sun cream, and I'll see you again same time next week.